Sheriff Tom Caldwell had served the quiet town of Millfield for over 2 decades, a steadfast presence amid its slow rhythms and familiar faces. The courthouse and jailhouse, modest buildings nestled near the town square, had rarely seen much action beyond minor disputes and occasional drunken brawls. Crime in Millfield was rare, and the sheriff's nights were usually filled with routine paperwork and the soft hum of silence. One late autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the chill crept through the streets, Tom wrapped up his daily rounds. The town seemed calm, bathed in the warm glow of street lamps and the faint scent of wood smoke drifting from chimneys. He paused at the jailhouse, checking the locks as was his habit, before heading inside to review the day's logs. Opening the creaky door, the familiar scent of aged wood and cold iron greeted him. The jail cell stood empty, except for one. In the corner cell, slumped against the cold wall, lay a figure motionless and pale. Tom's breath caught in his throat. "Who in God's name?" he muttered, stepping closer. The man's face was gaunt, eyes closed, lips parted, as if in a silent plea. There was no record of anyone being booked that day, no report of a prisoner in custody. The sheriff's instincts screamed that this was no routine matter. He called for Deputy Mason, who arrived swiftly, concern etched across his young face. Together, they examined the body. No identification, no wallet, no signs of violence, no clues at all. The man's clothes were threadbare and stained, but his presence in the jail was a complete mystery. Tom scoured the arrest logs and booking records multiple times. Nothing matched the man's description. No missing person reports had been filed, no disturbances reported nearby. The prisoner, whoever he was, seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The sheriff's unease grew. How had the body been left in the cell without anyone noticing? The jail was small, the staff limited, doors and windows were all accounted for. It was impossible that someone could have slipped in unnoticed. Tom ordered the local doctor to examine the body immediately. While waiting, he began questioning town residents. No one recalled seeing a stranger wandering the streets, no reports of altercations or disappearances. The town's close-knit nature made secrecy difficult, yet here was a corpse nobody had heard about. The doctor's verdict was baffling. The man had died days ago, but with no obvious cause, no trauma, no signs of illness, just the stillness of death in a place meant to hold the living. The timing and location defied explanation. Tom spent a restless night, turning the puzzle over in his mind. The jail cell, meant to be a place of containment and order, had become a crypt of secrets. The corpse's presence was an anomaly that challenged everything he knew about his town and his duty. As dawn broke over Millfield, the sheriff knew that this discovery was only the beginning. The unanswered questions hung heavy, questions about identity, justice, and the shadows lurking in familiar places. And in the heart of the town, behind iron bars and locked doors, a mystery waited to be unraveled. Sheriff Tom Caldwell paced the worn wooden floor of his office, the weight of the mysterious corpse pressing heavily on his mind. The unanswered questions about how the body had come to rest unnoticed in the jail cell gnawed at him relentlessly. He had gone over every log, questioned every deputy, and inspected every inch of the jailhouse, but nothing explained the impossible arrival of the man, or woman, who now lay dead behind bars. Tom gathered his deputies in the briefing room, determined to leave no stone unturned. "No one checked anyone in," he stated firmly. "No disturbances reported. The cell doors were locked, windows secured. We need to find out how that body got there without a trace." Deputy Mason, still pale from the night's discovery, frowned. "Sir, I double-checked the security logs. Nothing unusual. No one entered or left after you locked up last shift." The sheriff nodded grimly. "And no missing persons matching this description. No reports from the hospital or morgue." "No, sir," Mason replied. "It's like he just appeared." Tom's gaze hardened. Then we'll talk to the townsfolk. Someone must have seen something, heard something. Over the next days, Tom canvassed the quiet streets of Millfield, knocking on doors and asking neighbors about any strangers or unusual activity. The townspeople were tight-lipped, wary of stirring trouble in their peaceful community. A few recalled odd noises at night, vague footsteps near the jailhouse, or unexplained flickers of light from the old windows, but no one had witnessed an actual person entering or leaving the premises. At the local diner, Tom spoke with June, the owner, who had lived in Millfield for over 50 years. "Sheriff," she said softly, "there's been whispers about the jail. Folks say it's haunted, that sometimes the walls keep secrets darker than we want to know." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Haunted, huh?" June nodded. "Old stories about prisoners who never left, about things that can't be explained. But folks don't like to say it out loud." Back at the station, strange things began to happen. Security cameras installed near the jail cell occasionally malfunctioned, their footage distorted or erased. Radios emitted static bursts and unexplained noises during the late hours. Doors creaked open without cause, and cold drafts swept through locked rooms. Deputies whispered about feeling watched, about shadows moving just beyond sight. The sheriff himself felt an eerie presence, an unseen weight lingering in the air, especially near the cell where the corpse had been found. One night, Tom was alone in the station when he heard faint murmurs echoing through the halls, whispers that carried names he recognized from old case files, names long forgotten. His heart pounded as the voices seemed to swirl around him, fading into silence just as he tried to focus. Determined not to let fear take hold, Tom continued his investigation. He revisited the jail logs from years past, searching for irregularities or unexplained incidents. He uncovered reports of prisoners who vanished mysteriously, entries wiped clean from the books, and rumors of secret cells sealed off after strange events. The pieces began to form a disturbing picture, one that suggested the jail itself held secrets beyond ordinary crime and punishment. It was a place where past sins lingered, where justice had slipped through cracks in time and memory. Tom grappled with disbelief and a growing sense that something supernatural might be at work. Yet as sheriff, he felt compelled to protect his town, to confront whatever darkness had taken root in the place meant to uphold the law. The corpse in the jail cell was not just a mystery, it was a warning, and Tom Caldwell was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Sheriff Tom Caldwell sat alone in the dim glow of his office lamp, the weight of the unanswered questions pressing heavily on him. The investigation into the corpse found in the jail cell had led him down a winding path, one that unraveled the quiet facade of Millfield and revealed secrets long buried beneath its peaceful surface. As he sifted through old case files and town records, Tom stumbled upon a pattern of strange disappearances spanning decades. Names, dates, and vague descriptions were scattered across brittle pages, some cases closed hastily, others left cold without explanation. Many of the missing had last been seen near the jail or in its shadow. Curious, Tom reached out to Margaret Lawson, the town's unofficial historian and keeper of local law. Her small home was filled with dusty books and photographs, relics of a time when the town's secrets still whispered in the wind. "Sheriff," Margaret said gravely, as she showed him a faded map, "this jail has a dark past, built over the ruins of an old chapel. It carries the weight of forgotten prayers and broken promises. People say the souls of those who suffered unjustly here never truly left." Tom listened, intrigued and unsettled. Margaret recounted stories of prisoners who vanished without a trace, strange lights flickering in the cell blocks, and voices heard during the dead of night. Some say the jail itself is cursed, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead blurs. That night, Tom returned to the station with a new resolve but also a creeping dread. The corridors seemed colder, the shadows longer. As he walked past the now empty cell where the corpse had been found, a faint whisper brushed his ear, a name he recognized from the files. His heart hammered. Was it possible the jail held not just a corpse but a presence, something that refused to rest? He confided in Deputy Mason, who admitted to similar experiences, hearing footsteps when no one was there, doors slamming shut without cause, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Together, they set up surveillance equipment around the jail. Cameras and audio recorders captured nothing unusual by day, but at night, the devices recorded strange noises, soft moans, indistinct voices, and an eerie silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. One recording sent a chill down Tom's spine, a whisper repeating a single word, justice. Determined to understand, Tom began visiting the jail during late hours, hoping to confront the restless spirit. He spoke aloud, addressing any presence that might be listening. "I'm here to help," he said, voice steady, despite the cold gnawing at his bones. "If there's something you want us to know, tell me." Silence answered, but the next night, the whispers returned, clearer, more urgent. A shadow flickered at the edge of his vision, vanishing when he turned. Tom's skepticism wavered, replaced by a growing conviction that the jail was haunted by the unresolved pain of the past. The corpse's identity remained a mystery, but Tom sensed that the man, or spirit, was tied to the town's history of injustice and secrets. As the supernatural occurrences escalated, Tom grappled with disbelief and duty. He realized that solving this mystery required more than facts and evidence. It demanded confronting the unseen and acknowledging the weight of history. The sheriff faced a daunting truth. The jail was not just a building, but a vessel of memories and spirits crying out for justice. And until those cries were answered, the silence within its walls would never be broken. The night air inside the old Millfield jail was thick with unease as Sheriff Tom Caldwell prepared for what might be his most challenging confrontation yet. The past and present had woven together into a tapestry of shadows and whispers, and the mystery of the corpse was no longer just a puzzle. It had become a haunting force demanding resolution. Armed with the knowledge he'd gathered, Tom enlisted the help of Father Samuel Clark, a local priest known for his calm demeanor and experience with the town's supernatural legends. Together they planned to enter the jail late at night, to confront whatever restless spirit lingered and seek the truth behind the unexplained death. As they stepped into the cold, echoing corridors, Tom felt the oppressive weight settle over him again, the sense of unseen eyes watching, the chilling draft that seemed to breathe. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the peeling walls, and every footstep resonated like a whisper in the silence. Reaching the cell where the corpse had been found, they paused. Father Clark held a worn Bible in one hand, a crucifix in the other, and began a quiet prayer, his voice steady, despite the tension. Suddenly, a cold gust swept through the hallway, extinguishing their lanterns. Darkness swallowed them whole, and then faint murmurs rose from the shadows, anguished voices crying for justice, pleading for release. Tom's heart pounded as a translucent figure materialized within the cell, a man, pale and gaunt, eyes filled with sorrow and accusation. It was the very image of the corpse they had found, yet alive with ethereal light. "You found me," the apparition whispered, "but who will find the truth?" Tom stepped forward, voice firm but compassionate. "We're here to help. Tell us what happened." The spirit's gaze pierced his soul, revealing a tale of betrayal and silence. Years ago, the man had been wrongfully accused, locked away without trial. The town's fear and prejudice had condemned him, and in his final hours, justice was denied. Father Clark continued the prayer, invoking forgiveness and peace. The apparition's form flickered, the sorrow easing into a calm glow. "Speak for me," it urged softly. "Uncover the truth." With renewed determination, Tom vowed to uncover the hidden truths buried beneath the town's surface, the cover-ups, the silenced voices, the sins long concealed. But as they prepared to leave, a sudden noise shattered the moment. A heavy door slammed somewhere deep in the jail, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching rapidly. The deputies waiting outside called out, but no one answered. Tom and Father Clark exchanged a tense glance. The past was not yet done with them. Facing resistance from both the living and the dead, the sheriff realized that seeking justice meant confronting not only spectral forces, but the town's own shadows, denial, fear, and silence. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but Tom was resolved. He would face whatever darkness awaited, to bring peace to the restless and truth to the forgotten, because some mysteries demanded courage, not just to solve, but to live through. Months passed after Sheriff Tom Caldwell's chilling encounter in the Millfield jail, yet the shadow of the corpse, and the restless spirit it represented, continued to cast its weight over the town and the sheriff himself. The investigation into the mysterious death deepened, entwining with long-buried secrets and whispered histories that challenged everything Tom thought he knew about justice and truth. The townspeople grew uneasy. Rumors spread of strange happenings around the jailhouse, lights flickering at odd hours, unexplained cold spots, and the soft murmur of voices carried on the wind. Some avoided the area altogether, while others whispered prayers, hoping to keep the darkness at bay. Tom, though burdened, remained resolute. His pursuit of answers had led him through dusty archives, old diaries, and conversations with elders who remembered a time when the jail's walls held more than just prisoners. They held sorrow, injustice, and silence. One day, a breakthrough came. An elderly woman named Martha, whose family had lived in Millfield for generations, came forward with a worn leather-bound journal. The pages contained a confession, an account of a wrongful conviction, a hidden crime, and a cover-up that had condemned an innocent man to a tragic fate decades ago. The journal's revelations matched the ghostly visitor's story and the circumstances surrounding the corpse found in the jail cell. Armed with this evidence, Tom reopened the case officially, vowing to right the wrongs of the past. At the courthouse, the town gathered for a memorial service honoring the forgotten victim. As the sheriff spoke, a gentle breeze swept through the room, carrying with it a sense of peace. It was as if the restless spirit, finally acknowledged, was at last able to rest. Yet, the jail itself remained a solemn reminder. Its walls bore the scars of time and tragedy, a silent witness to lives altered and lost. Tom often found himself standing before the empty cell, reflecting on the fragile boundary between life and death, justice and injustice. He understood now that some truths linger beyond mortal grasp, that some spirits seek only to be heard and remembered. Though the mystery had found its measure of closure, the town and the sheriff would never forget the lessons learned. Justice was not just a matter of law, but of memory, empathy, and courage. And as dusk settled over Millfield, Sheriff Caldwell knew his vigil was complete. The shadows that once haunted the jail had receded, replaced by a quiet light, a legacy of honor for the lost, and a reminder that even in the darkest places, truth can shine. The jail cell stood empty, but its story lived on, a haunting echo of a time when a corpse was found without an arrest, and a town learned the true cost of silence. Sheriff Daniel Price was no stranger to strange calls, but the one he received, on a damp autumn evening, unsettled him more than usual. The tip came from a nervous local who reported odd noises and flickering lights at the old Henderson house on the outskirts of town, a place long abandoned and whispered about in fearful tones. As Daniel drove down the winding country road, thick fog curled around his cruiser's headlights, swallowing the familiar landscape in a gray haze. The Henderson house loomed ahead, its weathered facade sagging under years of neglect. Broken windows stared like empty eyes, and the front porch sagged beneath the weight of creeping vines. Daniel stepped from his vehicle, boots crunching on the gravel. The air was heavy and still, save for the distant hoot of an owl. His breath came visible in the chill as he approached the front door, the worn wood scarred by time and weather. He paused just before knocking, the silence pressing in around him. No answer, no sign of life, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. He knocked again, firmer this time, 3 sharp raps, echoing through the stillness. Still, nothing but the faint creak of the old house settling. His gaze swept the shadows beneath the gnarled trees and broken shutters, and a prickling sensation crawled up his spine. Something was watching. Daniel's eyes narrowed, scanning the dim spaces between the house and the surrounding woods. A fleeting movement caught his attention, a dark shape slipping behind a tree, vanishing before he could focus. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Price. I'm at the Henderson place. No one's answering, but there's something off here. Request backup, just in case." Static crackled in response. "Copy that, Sheriff. Backup en route." Daniel hesitated. The house was known for its troubled past, stories of disappearances, unexplained accidents, and a lingering unease that kept even the bravest at bay. But as sheriff, his duty was clear. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for the doorframe, and noticed fresh footprints in the damp earth, barely visible, but unmistakably recent. Someone had been here. A sudden gust rustled dead leaves, and the porch light flickered weakly before plunging into darkness. Daniel's pulse quickened. He pushed the door open, the hinges groaning a mournful welcome. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and something faintly metallic. Shadows clung to every corner, swallowing the beam of his flashlight. Daniel called out, voice steady but low, "Anyone here?" "This is Sheriff Price." Silence answered. As he stepped further in, the floorboards creaked beneath his boots. The house seemed to breathe, alive with a quiet menace. Outside, the fog thickened, wrapping the house in a shroud. Daniel paused in the darkened hallway, senses alert. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, a presence just beyond sight, patient and waiting. When the sheriff knocked on the door, nobody came to answer, but something was watching. Sheriff Daniel Price stood inside the Henderson house, the heavy wooden door closing silently behind him. The faint glow of his flashlight barely pierced the thick shadows that clung to the peeling wallpaper and cracked plaster. Every creak and whisper of the old house seemed amplified, echoing through the empty rooms like distant voices. He moved cautiously down the narrow hallway, eyes flicking to every corner, every doorway. The air was cold and stale, carrying the faint scent of mildew mixed with something metallic and sharp, something that made his stomach churn. The house was quiet, but the silence felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. As Daniel reached the living room, he noticed the fireplace, long cold and filled with ash, that looked recently disturbed. A faint outline of footprints dusted in soot led toward a staircase. He followed, heart pounding, senses heightened. Halfway up the stairs, a sudden noise made him freeze, a soft tapping, like fingernails drumming against wood, coming from a room at the end of the hall. He drew his flashlight toward the door, its surface marred by scratches deep enough to catch his fingernail. "Hello?" he called, voice steady but low. "This is Sheriff Price. If someone's here, come out." The tapping ceased abruptly, replaced by a hollow silence so thick it pressed against his ears. He reached for the doorknob, turning it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a small cluttered room, bathed in moonlight, streaming through cracked shutters. On a rickety table lay a collection of strange objects, old photographs, worn letters, and what looked like scraps of cloth embroidered with unfamiliar symbols. Daniel picked up a photograph, a faded black and white image of a woman staring directly at the camera, her eyes dark and piercing. As he studied it, a sudden chill swept through the room, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. Behind him, the door slammed shut. He spun around, banging his fist against the wood. It wouldn't budge. The room grew colder still, and a soft whisper brushed his ear. Indistinct words carried on a breathy wind. Daniel's pulse hammered. He tried the door again, locked tight. His radio crackled, but the signal was weak, filled with static and fragmented voices. He called out, "Dispatch, backup, anyone." Only silence answered. The sheriff's eyes darted to the window. Beyond the glass, shadows shifted unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed to watch him with malevolent intent. Time stretched and distorted. Minutes felt like hours as Daniel struggled to keep his composure. Suddenly, the whispering grew louder, circling him like a tempest of voices speaking in tongues, fragmented sentences hinting at betrayal, sorrow, and vengeance. The air thickened, the room pulsed with an unseen energy. Then in a fleeting moment of clarity, Daniel glimpsed a figure in the corner, vague and shimmering, but unmistakably human. The apparition's eyes locked with his, filled with anguish and warning. The presence didn't move, but Daniel felt its gaze bore into his soul. Desperation mounted. He searched the room for anything to escape, tools, keys, even a hidden latch, but found nothing. As the whispers crescendoed, he pressed his palms against the door, willing it to give way. With a sudden creak and a rush of cold air, the door swung open. Daniel stumbled out into the hallway, breath ragged. The oppressive atmosphere clung to him, but the immediate danger had passed. For now, he paused, catching his breath, the feeling of being watched lingering like a shadow. The investigation had just begun, and the sheriff knew that whatever watched from the darkness wasn't done with him or the house. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a warning. Some doors should never be opened, and some watchers never rest. Sheriff Daniel Caldwell's nights, following his encounter in the Henderson house, were restless and haunted. The experience had carved a deep unease in his mind, a feeling that the house's secrets were far from dormant. As he returned to his duties, he found himself drawn back to the place, compelled by an unshakable need to understand what had been watching him. The town itself seemed to hold its breath whenever the Henderson house was mentioned. Longtime residents whispered of tragedies, long buried, disappearances never explained, and a darkness that had settled over the property like a suffocating shroud. Daniel sought out these stories, piecing together a tapestry of fear and loss that stretched back decades. One evening, he met with Martha Grayson, an elderly woman whose family had lived in Millfield for generations. Her eyes gleamed with a mixture of sorrow and warning as she recounted tales of the house's past. "They say the house watches," Martha said softly, "that it's hungry for answers, for souls, for justice. Folks who go in don't come back the same, or don't come back at all." Daniel listened, absorbing her words, the weight of generations pressing upon him. Back at the station, the sheriff experienced strange phenomena that defied explanation. Lights flickered unpredictably, phones rang with no one on the line, and shadowy figures appeared fleetingly at the edge of his vision. Colleagues reported similar disturbances, anomalies that couldn't be chalked up to old wiring or fatigue. Times, Daniel's dreams were invaded by vivid visions of the house's dark history. Scenes of sorrow, betrayal, and unfinished business played out in spectral form. He saw faces twisted in anguish, heard whispers pleading for release, and felt the cold grasp of unseen hands reaching for him. Determined to confront the presence, Daniel brought in Father Samuel Clark, a man versed in spiritual matters and local law. Together, they explored the house, conducting prayers and rituals intended to ease the restless spirits. But the house resisted, its shadows deepening, its silence growing oppressive. One night, as they stood in the cellar beneath the house, Daniel felt a surge of cold unlike anything before. The air thickened with voices speaking in unison, names, warnings, and fragments of confessions. The spirit presence coalesced into a figure, translucent yet powerful, a soul bound by pain and injustice. Daniel realized the spirit was not merely watching, but trapped, yearning to be understood, to find peace. The revelations forced Daniel to face uncomfortable truths about the town's past, cover-ups, forgotten crimes, and the cost of silence. The house had become a vessel for these unresolved stories, a prison for the souls caught in its web. As the haunting intensified, Daniel struggled to maintain his resolve, balancing skepticism with belief. He grappled with fear and doubt, but refused to turn away. The sheriff understood that to bring peace, he must not only face the supernatural, but also confront the human failings that had allowed darkness to take root. His investigation deepened, blending the tangible with the spectral, the past with the present. For Daniel Caldwell, the line between the living and the unseen had blurred, and the watcher in the darkness was waiting for justice to be served. The night air inside the old Henderson house was thick with tension as Sheriff Daniel Caldwell and Father Samuel Clark stepped cautiously through the shadowed halls. The flickering beam of Daniel's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, cracked plaster, and the heavy silence that seemed to swallow every footstep. Father Clark held his crucifix firmly, murmuring prayers under his breath. "This place has long carried a burden, Daniel. We must be prepared for what we might face." As they approached the cellar stairs, the temperature dropped sharply, frost forming on the wooden railing. The faint sound of dripping water echoed beneath the floorboards. Daniel felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him, watching, waiting. At the bottom of the stairs, the cellar opened into a cramped, musty chamber. In the center stood a weathered wooden table, stained dark with age. Surrounding it were symbols etched into the stone floor, arcane markings that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. Suddenly, a cold gust swept through the room, extinguishing their candles and plunging them into near-total darkness. The beam from Daniel's flashlight trembled as a spectral figure began to materialize before them, a translucent man with hollow eyes and a face etched with sorrow. The apparition spoke, voice echoing like a distant wind. "Why do you disturb my rest? Why do you seek the truth buried beneath decades of silence?" Daniel swallowed, steadying his voice. "We seek justice. We seek to uncover what was hidden and to bring peace to those who suffered." The spirit's gaze intensified. "My name was Thomas Harlan, wrongfully accused and condemned, betrayed by those sworn to protect. I linger here, bound by the weight of injustice." Father Clark stepped forward, raising the crucifix. "We pray for your peace, Thomas. Release your anger and find rest in God's grace." But the apparition's form flickered, torn between rage and sorrow. "My torment is not easily undone. The truth must be known." The silence broken. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift, the walls closing in, shadows twisting into grotesque shapes. Whispers rose into a cacophony of voices, each telling stories of betrayal, fear, and pain. Daniel and Father Clark braced themselves as objects trembled and a chilling wind swirled. The house resisted their intrusion, its dark secrets fighting to remain concealed. Gathering his courage, Daniel spoke firmly. "We will uncover the truth, Thomas. You will not be forgotten." The spirit's anguished wail pierced the air before fading into a sorrowful sigh. Light returned to the cellar, and the oppressive weight lifted. Rising from the cellar, Daniel felt changed, his resolve steeled by the encounter. He understood that confronting the past required more than courage. It demanded compassion, persistence, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. The sheriff and the priest emerged into the night, the house standing silent but watchful behind them. Though the presence had been confronted, the journey to uncover the full story was only beginning. Daniel knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with resistance, both earthly and spectral, but for the sake of justice and peace, he was ready to face whatever darkness remained, because some doors once opened cannot be closed. Months had passed since Sheriff Daniel Caldwell and Father Samuel Clark faced the restless spirit of Thomas Harlan in the cold cellar of the Henderson house. Though the apparition had faded, the echoes of that night continued to reverberate through the town and Daniel's own mind. The weight of the past no longer lay solely in the shadows of the old house. It had become a living, breathing part of Millfield's story. Back at the sheriff's office, Daniel pored over records, eyewitness accounts, and newly uncovered evidence. The journal entries of Thomas Harlan, the testimonies of long-forgotten witnesses, and the accounts of families touched by silence, all wove together into a tapestry of injustice and pain. With renewed determination, Daniel reopened the cold case that had haunted the town for decades. Word spread quickly. Townspeople who had kept their silence for fear or apathy now spoke cautiously but openly. The sheriff's efforts rekindled hope that forgotten wrongs might be righted and restless souls finally laid to rest. The courtroom buzzed on the day the case was formally reopened. Descendants of those involved sat quietly, eyes wary but hopeful. Daniel presented the evidence with unwavering clarity. The suppressed reports, the falsified testimonies, and the overwhelming proof that Thomas Harlan had been wrongfully accused and condemned. The judge, moved by the weight of the truth, ordered a formal exoneration and called for a community remembrance. The decision reverberated through Millfield, a symbolic but powerful acknowledgement of the town's collective conscience. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the town gathered outside the Henderson house for the memorial service. Flowers were laid, prayers whispered, and stories shared. The air seemed lighter, the shadows less oppressive. For the first time in decades, the house was not a place of fear, but of remembrance. Daniel stood among the crowd, his heart heavy yet hopeful. He had faced not only the darkness within the house, but also the darkness within the hearts of those who had hidden the truth. The journey had changed him, sharpened his resolve, and deepened his understanding of justice. Though the specter of the past would always linger, the town had taken a step toward healing. The jail cell that once held a corpse unknown was now a symbol of courage, the courage to confront silence, to seek truth, and to honor those lost. Back at the station, life gradually returned to normal, but Daniel often found himself standing near the old jailhouse, looking toward the Henderson house with a quiet reverence. The watchers, the shadows and memories, had not vanished entirely, but they no longer threatened. Instead, they stood as guardians of the past, reminding all who passed that justice is not merely the law, but the relentless pursuit of truth, compassion, and remembrance. As the sun set over Millfield, Sheriff Daniel Caldwell knew his vigil was at an end. Yet the story would live on, etched into the town's heart, whispered in the winds, and held in the silence where the watchers once waited. Some mysteries are never fully solved, but sometimes acknowledging them is enough to bring peace, and that peace was the greatest justice of all. The clock on the sheriff's desk ticked steadily toward midnight, its soft rhythm the only sound in the quiet office of Millfield County. Sheriff James Harper rubbed his tired eyes and glanced at the worn leather chair across from him, a chair that had held him through countless long nights, each one filled with the weight of responsibility for this remote rural town. The stars outside were hidden behind thick clouds, and a chill breeze whispered through the trees beyond the courthouse walls. Just as the clock struck 12, the shrill ring of the phone shattered the silence. Harper's hand snapped up, instinctively, fingers wrapping around the receiver with practiced ease. "Sheriff's office," he answered, voice calm but alert. On the other end was a voice, fragile, panicked, and barely more than a whisper. "Please, you have to help me. They're out here, in the woods. I don't know where to run." The line crackled, a tangle of static and frantic breaths punctuating the desperate plea. The voice was fragmented, the words trailing off into eerie, unintelligible sounds. A low growl or moan echoed faintly in the background, sending a shiver down Harper's spine. "Where exactly are you? Can you give me your location?" he pressed. "By the old creek, near Black Hollow," the voice gasped. "They're coming. Don't come alone." Then the line went dead. Sheriff Harper sat back, heart pounding. The Black Hollow woods were dense, sprawling over miles of uneven terrain, wild, tangled and steeped in local legends, stories of disappearances, strange lights, and chilling screams that had haunted generations. Most townsfolk steered clear after dusk, believing the forest was cursed or home to something darker. He glanced at the dispatcher's desk. "Get me all available deputies. We're heading out immediately. There's someone in trouble in Black Hollow." The dispatcher hesitated. "Sheriff, it's late. The woods are dangerous at night. Should we wait until morning?" "No," Harper replied firmly. "If that call was real, someone needs help now." He grabbed his jacket, holstered his service weapon, and stepped into the cold night. The town was silent, the only sound his boots crunching on the gravel as he made his way to the cruiser. The street lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to dance and shift with the wind. As he drove toward the edge of town, the dense forest loomed closer, its darkness swallowing the headlights. Harper's mind raced with the possibilities: an injured hiker, someone lost, or something far more sinister. Arriving near the trailhead, he switched off the engine and stepped out, the crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot the only sound. His flashlight cut through the thick fog, revealing twisted branches and tangled undergrowth. He dialed into his radio. "This is Sheriff Harper. I'm entering Black Hollow alone. Anyone nearby? Keep your radios open." Static replied, no other voices. Taking a deep breath, he advanced into the shadows, the haunting cries from the phone still ringing in his ears. The woods seemed to close in around him, every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves heightening his senses. Though no one was visible, Harper felt eyes upon him, watching, waiting. The midnight call had sent the sheriff into the woods, but what waited there was a mystery darker than any he had faced, and he never came back. Sheriff James Harper's flashlight pierced through the dense darkness of Black Hollow, casting long trembling beams over twisted roots and tangled underbrush. The fog hung thick and heavy, muffling sounds and warping familiar shapes into ominous silhouettes. Every step he took crunched on brittle leaves, the echo swallowed quickly by the vast oppressive silence. The woods seemed alive, breathing in sync with his own ragged breaths. Harper's eyes darted to the shadows between trees where movement flitted just beyond the edge of his vision. Something watching, lurking, waiting. He paused near a gnarled oak, the bark scarred with strange symbols carved deep into the wood, patterns unfamiliar but unmistakably deliberate. Harper crouched to inspect them, running his fingers over the rough grooves. The markings pulsed faintly, as if resonating with the forest's eerie energy. A sudden rustling to his left snapped his attention away. Harper swung his flashlight toward the noise, heart pounding. Branches shook violently, but no creature emerged. The forest seemed to swallow whatever had disturbed it. He reached for his radio, but the static was thick, cutting off any clear signal. He tried again. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Harper. Come in." Only a hissing silence answered. Frustration and unease crept over him. The deeper he ventured, the more isolated he felt. The woods were hostile. Every step forward met with cold drafts and inexplicable shadows. At a fork in the path, Harper noticed fresh footprints pressed into the damp earth, barefoot, irregular, as if someone had fled in panic. They led deeper into the forest, toward a rocky outcrop known locally as the Watcher's Perch. He followed the trail cautiously, muscles tense. As he climbed, a distant howl echoed through the trees, a mournful, haunting sound that sent a chill racing down his spine. Reaching the top, Harper scanned the horizon. The fog blanketed the landscape, hiding the world beyond in a ghostly haze. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, dark and impenetrable. Suddenly, a whisper floated on the wind, unintelligible but urgent. Harper strained to listen, heart hammering. The sensation of being observed intensified, prickling every nerve. He tried calling out, "If you need help, show yourself." No answer came, only the rustle of leaves and a sudden snapping branch behind him. Spinning around, Harper caught a glimpse of a shadow slipping between the trees, faster than any man. His pulse quickened. Something was stalking him, a presence both unseen and deeply aware. He pulled out his flashlight, sweeping it in wide arcs. The beam caught fleeting figures, faint, translucent shapes that flickered and dissolved like smoke. Memories flashed unbidden, stories of previous disappearances in Black Hollow, of those who entered but never returned, of strange lights, unnatural sounds, and warnings etched into local legend. His resolve wavered, but duty pushed him onward. As night deepened, Harper's radio remained dead. His sense of direction faltered amid shifting paths that seemed to rearrange themselves, trapping him in a maze of trees and shadows. The forest whispered secrets he could not comprehend, and the watcher's eyes remained fixed upon him, silent, patient, and relentless. With every step, the midnight call's urgency echoed louder, pulling him deeper into a darkness that might never release him. And the woods waited, hungry and watchful, for the sheriff who dared to enter. Sheriff James Harper stumbled deeper into the heart of Black Hollow, his flashlight beam flickering as fatigue and fear gnawed at his resolve. The woods around him were alive with unsettling sounds, the rustle of leaves, distant whispers carried on the wind, and the occasional snap of a twig that sounded too deliberate to be mere wildlife. Shadows stretched and twisted at the edges of his vision, fleeting forms that vanished whenever he tried to focus on them. His breath came in short gasps as memories surged unbidden, cases of missing persons who had ventured into these woods and never returned. Faces of those lost flashed in his mind, each one a silent plea for justice. Stories from the townsfolk about an ancient presence, a watcher who claimed souls, rang louder in his ears now. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. A cold chill wrapped around him like a shroud, and his breath hung heavy in the air. The beam of his flashlight trembled as he noticed a pale figure standing between the trees ahead. A woman translucent and glowing faintly, her eyes sorrowful yet searching. "Sheriff." Her voice was a whisper, fragile and distant. "You shouldn't be here." Harper swallowed hard, heart pounding. "Who are you? What happened here?" She raised a hand, pointing toward a cluster of stones etched with symbols. "They trapped me here, bound by their fear and lies. You must find the truth, or be lost, like me." As she faded, a low growl rumbled through the forest, and shadows surged toward him, dark, shifting shapes that pressed close, cold and suffocating. Desperation clawed at Harper's mind. He fought to steady his breath, to keep his grip on reality, as visions flooded him, snatches of past horrors, betrayal, and pain, locked within these woods. He saw glimpses of the lost souls, their faces twisted in anguish, trapped in an endless twilight. The forest's grip tightened, and whispers morphed into anguished screams. Harper staggered, struggling against the invisible force that sought to drag him under. In the midst of chaos, a faint light appeared, a beacon cutting through the gloom. Drawing on every ounce of strength, Harper focused on the glow, moving toward it with trembling steps. The light revealed a small clearing, where an ancient tree stood, its bark scarred with carvings, telling a story of sacrifice and vengeance. At its base lay remnants of old charms and offerings, tokens meant to appease or contain the restless spirits. Harper knelt, touching the worn symbols. "I promise to uncover your truth," he whispered. The shadows recoiled slightly, and the chilling cries softened. But the watcher's eyes remained fixed upon him, watching, waiting. Exhausted and shaken, Harper realized that escaping these woods would require more than physical endurance. He needed to confront the darkness rooted in both the land and the hearts of those who had come before. His mind teetered on the edge of sanity, but his determination burned brighter than ever. The midnight call had led him here, not just to a place, but to a reckoning. And Sheriff James Harper was not ready to surrender. The oppressive silence of Black Hollow was broken only by Sheriff James Harper's steady breathing, as he squared his shoulders and prepared to confront the darkness that had ensnared him. The ancient tree in the clearing loomed above him like a sentinel, its bark etched with symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Harper felt the weight of generations bearing down, as if the forest itself demanded reckoning. Father Samuel Clark's words echoed in his mind. To find peace, one must face the source. Harper steadied his grip on his flashlight, feeling the cold steel of his sidearm, though he knew this was a battle far beyond physical force. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced before him, forms twisting and shifting, humanoid, yet otherworldly. The Watcher revealed itself, a tall figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning like embers in the night. Its voice was a chilling whisper that seemed to reverberate through the trees. "Why do you trespass, mortal? This is sacred ground, bound by pain and blood." Harper met the gaze without flinching. "I came because someone called for help. I'm here to end the suffering and uncover the truth." The entity laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling in a dead wind. "Truth is a chain that binds us all. You seek to break it, but breaking the chain can unleash worse than silence." With a sudden movement, the shadows surged, swirling around Harper, pressing in with icy hands that tried to sap his strength. He staggered, but resisted, calling on every ounce of will. "Your pain is not forgotten," Harper said firmly, "but hiding in darkness only feeds despair. Let me help you find peace." The Watcher's form flickered, momentarily revealing a tortured face beneath the cloak, eyes haunted by betrayal, lips trembling with sorrow. "I am bound by those who feared the truth," it whispered. "Decades ago, lies condemned an innocent soul. The land drank their pain, and I was born from their anguish." Harper realized the entity was the spirit of the wronged, trapped in a cycle of vengeance and sorrow. Drawing the crucifix Father Clark had given him, Harper held it aloft, chanting prayers taught long ago. The forest seemed to respond. The air lightened, shadows receded, and the oppressive weight eased. The Watcher's form softened, its anger melting into gratitude. "Thank you," it breathed before dissolving into a cascade of shimmering light that dispersed into the night. Harper collapsed to his knees, exhaustion washing over him. The woods were still, peaceful, for now. As he made his way back through the clearing, the carvings on the tree glowed faintly, a silent blessing from the Watcher. But Harper knew the fight wasn't over. The darkness might retreat, but the scars remained. The midnight call had led him to confront ancient pain and hidden truths, and though the Watcher had found release, the sheriff's duty to protect and remember would continue. For some shadows never fully fade, and some doors, once opened, forever change the world beyond them. The dawn's first light filtered softly through the trees as Sheriff James Harper emerged from Black Hollow, his body weary but his spirit resolute. The forest, once oppressive and alive with shadows, now seemed quieter, as if the ancient presence that had haunted it had at last found peace, or at least respite. Yet, the weight of what he had faced lingered in his bones. Back in town, the news of the sheriff's mysterious night journey quickly became the subject of hushed conversations and speculation. Some dismissed it as a routine search that had gone long. Others whispered of something darker, a confrontation with forces beyond understanding. But Harper said little, carrying his burden silently as he resumed his duties. In the days that followed, the sheriff delved deeper into the history of Black Hollow. He discovered that the land had long been steeped in tragedy, unsolved disappearances, whispered curses, and a legacy of fear passed down through generations. The ancient tree, the carved symbols, and the spirit he had confronted were all threads in a tapestry woven from pain, betrayal, and the desperate need for justice. Harper worked with Father Samuel Clark and a handful of trusted deputies to document the findings and bring the town together in acknowledgement of its past. They held a small ceremony near the clearing, honoring those lost and vowing to protect the future. Though the woods no longer echoed with angry whispers, the mystery of Black Hollow remained a solemn reminder of the delicate balance between the known and the unseen. The sheriff often found himself drawn back to the edge of the forest, standing silently as the wind stirred the leaves. He understood now that the woods were a living memory, a place where history's shadows waited to be faced. The midnight call, the desperate plea that had sent him into the dark, was a reminder that some voices must be heard, some secrets unveiled, even when the cost is great. Years later, new generations of deputies would listen to Sheriff Harper's tale with wide eyes, learning the importance of courage, respect, and humility in the face of the unknown. And though the watcher in the woods had faded into legend, the boundary between this world and the next remained thin, an eternal threshold that only the brave dared cross. Sheriff James Harper never returned to Black Hollow after that final night, but his story became part of the town's fabric, a warning and a beacon. For in the depths of the woods, beneath the moon's cold gaze, something still watches and waits. Sheriff Luke Garrett had always been the steadfast heart of Millbrook, a small town where everyone knew each other's names and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. His badge, a polished silver emblem gleaming with the town's seal, hung proudly on his desk each night, a symbol not just of authority, but of his lifelong commitment to protecting the people he cared about. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled outside the courthouse windows, Luke arrived early, ready to tackle the day's paperwork. But as he reached for his badge, a ritual he'd performed countless times, his fingers closed on empty air. The badge was gone. His brows knitted in confusion as he searched the surface of his desk, rifled through drawers, and even checked his coat pockets. Nothing. The badge had vanished without a trace. Probably just misplaced, he muttered, trying to steady his nerves. But deep down, a knot of unease began to form. He asked the deputy who cleaned the office the night before, but she swore the badge was there when she locked up. No one else had been in the office, or so it seemed. Luke decided to expand his search, visiting his home and car, retracing his steps from the previous day. Yet no sign of the badge appeared. As the hours passed, the sheriff's initial disbelief gave way to a creeping anxiety. This was no ordinary loss. By midday, rumors began to spread through town. Whispers floated from the diner to the hardware store about the missing badge, a talisman so tied to Luke's identity that its absence felt like an omen. Meanwhile, strange incidents began to disrupt the usual rhythm of Millbrook. Lights flickered unpredictably in the courthouse, shadows seemed to shift unnaturally along walls, and townsfolk reported fleeting glimpses of figures disappearing into alleyways. Luke tried to dismiss these as coincidences, yet a subtle change lingered in the air. People looked at him differently, some with concern, others with a hesitant distance. Late that afternoon, as Luke left the sheriff's office, he noticed something else, a fleeting absence at his feet. He stopped, shining his flashlight toward the pavement. The beam revealed the uneven cracks and fallen leaves, but no shadow followed his movements. He blinked, looking down again, heart quickening. For the first time, Sheriff Luke Garrett saw that his own shadow had vanished. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He hurried home, uneasy thoughts swirling. What did it mean to lose one's badge, to lose one's shadow? Was his identity unraveling in ways he could not yet understand? As night fell over Millbrook, the sheriff sat alone in his study, staring into the darkened room. The missing badge was more than an object. It was a symbol of everything he stood for, and now it was gone. The silence in the house seemed heavier, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl, a reminder that sometimes the things we lose are not just lost to us, but taken. Sheriff Garrett's world had begun to shift, and he was only just beginning to understand the price of what he had lost. Sheriff Luke Garrett woke the next morning with a heaviness pressing on his chest. The missing badge was not just a physical loss, it felt like an erosion of his very identity. As he stepped outside, the early light revealed an unsettling truth. His shadow still did not follow him. No matter how he moved, the ground beneath remained oddly bare, as if some part of him had been erased. He tried everything to understand. He stood in front of mirrors, turned under street lamps, and even asked his deputies if they noticed anything strange. "Sheriff, your shadow's gone," Deputy Reynolds said hesitantly, eyes wide. "It's like you're not casting one at all." The realization unsettled Luke further. Shadows, after all, were more than mere absence of light. They were extensions of ourselves, silent companions that anchored us to the world. Meanwhile, the town itself seemed to shift around him. Shadows moved oddly in the corners of his vision, flickering and stretching where they should not. People whispered, casting furtive glances his way, as if sensing the change in their sheriff, but afraid to speak openly. At the diner, the local butcher, Tom, remarked quietly, "You don't look like the man I've known all these years. Something's wrong." Luke tried to dismiss it, but even his closest friends seemed to distance themselves, their expressions flickering with fear and confusion. At night, he noticed more disturbing signs. Streetlights buzzed, casting broken shadows that danced and writhed. In his own home, reflections in windows and mirrors warped strangely, sometimes showing a shadow where none should be, or none where one belonged. Luke's mind teetered on the edge of disbelief. Was this some kind of curse, a supernatural affliction, or a slow unraveling of his own sanity? Determined to find answers, he turned to old town records and local folklore. He learned of a legend, an ancient curse said to strip a person of their shadow as punishment for breaking sacred bonds or harboring dark secrets. The missing shadow was a sign of losing one's soul or self. That night, while walking through the courthouse yard, Luke felt a chill brush past him, like a whisper of wind that carried voices just beyond hearing. He looked down, searching for the elusive shadow, but found only darkness. His radio crackled suddenly with static, and a faint voice whispered, "Find what was lost before it's too late." Luke's grip tightened on his flashlight. The badge and the shadow, both symbols of his authority and being, were gone, and whatever had taken them was watching, waiting. The sheriff realized that reclaiming what was lost meant facing a darkness far deeper than he had imagined, a darkness tied to the town's buried past and perhaps to himself. Isolation deepened as he struggled against an invisible force eroding his very presence. The badge's disappearance was only the beginning. Now, with no shadow to follow, Luke Garrett walked a thin line between the world he knew and the shadows creeping to consume him. Sheriff Luke Garrett's world grew darker with each passing day. The absence of his shadow was no longer a mere curiosity. It had become a haunting symbol of his fading presence, a visible sign that something was profoundly wrong. His reflection in mirrors became distorted, sometimes missing entirely, leaving him staring at a face that felt less his own. Desperate for answers, Luke turned to Millbrook's oldest residents, hoping their memories held fragments of forgotten lore. At the edge of town, he met Agnes Whitaker, a reclusive woman known for her knowledge of local legends and occult traditions. "Sheriff," Agnes said in a voice as weathered as the ancient trees, "losing your shadow is a sign. It means your soul is slipping away, caught between this world and the next. Something is binding you, something dark." Luke listened intently as she spoke of an old curse tied to a betrayal long buried in Millbrook's history, a tale of greed, jealousy, and vengeance that had left a scar on the land. According to Agnes, the badge symbolized not just his authority, but his soul's anchor. Without it, he was vulnerable to forces beyond human comprehension. That night, Luke returned home, his mind racing. Shadows flickered on the walls, twisting into shapes that whispered his name. His house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. He lay awake, memories and fears intertwining in a restless torment. Images of past cases and lost friends, blurred with visions of shadowy figures lurking just beyond sight. The thin veil between reality and nightmare grew thinner. In the days that followed, the town's atmosphere shifted subtly but unmistakably. People reported strange sightings, silhouettes without bodies, voices calling from empty streets, and fleeting glimpses of a dark figure resembling the sheriff himself, except his shadow was there. Luke's isolation deepened. Friends who once stood by him now avoided eye contact, speaking in hushed tones. Rumors spread of a curse afflicting the sheriff, and unease gripped the community. One evening, as Luke walked through the courthouse yard, the temperature dropped sharply. A cold breath brushed past him, carrying faint whispers, "Return what is lost, or be consumed." He turned sharply, catching sight of a figure cloaked in darkness, a tall, imposing presence with eyes like burning coals. The figure's smile was cruel, and it pointed toward the sheriff's empty badge case. Luke's voice trembled as he demanded, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure's laughter echoed through the night. "I am the shadow that claims what is due. Without your badge you are mine." Panic surged, but Luke's determination flared brighter. He would not surrender, not to fear, not to darkness. As the supernatural forces closed in, Luke fought to hold on to his identity, to reclaim the missing pieces of himself before they vanished forever. The battle was not just for his badge or his shadow, it was for his very soul. And the sheriff knew that time was running out. Sheriff Luke Garrett stood alone on the edge of Millbrook's ancient forest, the weight of the missing badge heavy in his heart, and the cold absence of his shadow tugging at his very being. The night around him was alive with unnatural sounds, whispers carried on the wind, branches creaking as if moved by invisible hands, and the occasional distant howl that sent shivers down his spine. His only guide was the fading light of a battered lantern, and the cryptic warnings he had uncovered from the town's oldest records. According to the tales, reclaiming a lost shadow and breaking a curse meant confronting the dark entity responsible, a presence that thrived on fear and the erosion of identity. As he ventured deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in, their twisted limbs forming a labyrinth of shadows. Strange symbols marked the bark, sigils meant to bind or protect, though their meanings were lost to time. Luke's footsteps were slow but determined, each step a defiance against the encroaching darkness. Suddenly, the air grew icy. A chilling voice, low and guttural, echoed through the trees. "Why do you seek what you have forsaken?" From the shadows emerged the entity that had stolen Luke's badge and shadow, a tall, imposing figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing with malevolent fire. It moved with unnatural grace, its presence suffocating. "I am here to reclaim what is mine," the entity declared. "Your badge, your shadow, they belong to me now." Luke gripped his lantern tighter, feeling the cold seep into his bones. "They're part of me," he said firmly. "You won't have them." A sinister smile curled on the entity's lips. "Then you must prove it. Face me." The forest around them twisted and shimmered, reality bending, as the battle began, not of fists and guns, but of wills and souls. Luke felt waves of despair wash over him, memories of doubts and fears threatening to overwhelm. The entity whispered his failures, his loneliness, the moments he had questioned his worth. But the sheriff drew strength from his love for Millbrook, from the faces of those who depended on him, and from the unyielding resolve that had defined his life. With a cry, Luke raised the badge, found moments before beneath a twisted root, glowing faintly with an inner light. Its weight was real, its power undeniable. The entity recoiled, its shadowy form flickering. Luke's shadow, barely visible but growing stronger, stretched toward him. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, as light clashed with darkness, summoning every ounce of courage. Luke stepped forward, reclaiming both his badge and shadow. The entity let out a final, anguished scream before dissolving into mist, leaving the woods silent once more. Exhausted but victorious, Luke emerged from Black Hollow, dawn breaking across the sky. The badge gleamed on his chest, his shadow once again faithfully trailing behind. He had faced the darkness within and without, and won. But the sheriff knew this victory was fragile, a constant reminder that shadows lurk at the edge of every light. And as he looked toward Millbrook, Luke Garrett vowed to carry the badge and his shadow with honor, guarding his town and himself against the darkness that waits. Sheriff Luke Garrett returned to Millbrook as the first light of dawn softened the edges of the night's darkness. The badge, now warm and gleaming on his chest, felt like a solid affirmation of his reclaimed identity. More importantly, his shadow stretched steadily behind him, a silent but vital companion, once again tethering him to the world he swore to protect. Though the immediate threat had been vanquished, Luke knew that the ordeal had changed him. The disappearance of his badge and shadow had peeled back the layers of certainty he once took for granted, revealing a vulnerability beneath the surface of his authority and presence. The experience had forced him to confront fears both external and internal, fear of losing himself, fear of the unknown, and fear of the darkness lurking beyond the visible world. Back at the sheriff's office, the townspeople gathered in small clusters, their voices hushed but filled with a new respect. The legend of the missing badge and the shadowless sheriff had spread, blending into Millbrook's folklore. Some spoke of it as a cautionary tale about pride and humility. Others saw it as a testament to courage and perseverance. Deputy Reynolds approached Luke quietly, eyes reflecting both relief and awe. "Sheriff, you've been through something none of us can fully understand, but you came back, and that means something." Luke nodded, gratitude mingling with exhaustion. "It means we're all stronger than we think, especially when we remember who we are." The sheriff spent the following days visiting those who had supported him, old friends, the historian Agnes Whitaker, and Father Samuel Clark, whose prayers and guidance had provided strength. Together they discussed the thin veil between light and darkness, and the importance of guarding both. Millbrook itself seemed to breathe easier. The shadows no longer flickered unpredictably, and the uneasy silence that had haunted the town lifted. Life returned to its steady rhythm, punctuated by laughter, hard work, and the simple joys of community. Yet Luke remained vigilant. He knew that darkness was never fully vanquished. It only retreats, waiting for moments of weakness or forgetfulness to creep back. The badge on his chest and the shadow at his feet were more than symbols. They were reminders of the delicate balance he must maintain. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the town square, Luke paused outside the courthouse. He looked down at his shadow, now steady and real, stretched long by the fading light. A quiet smile touched his lips. He understood now that identity is not just what we carry or what follows us, but what we choose to stand for in the face of uncertainty. The sheriff's badge was no longer just a piece of metal. It was a beacon, a promise, and the shadow that danced beside him was a testament to his enduring presence. Millbrook's protector had returned, not unscathed but whole, and though the shadows would always watch, so would he, ready, steadfast, forever present. Sheriff Michael Hayes had always been a man of reason and duty. In the small town of Pine Ridge, nestled between dense forests and winding rivers, he was the steady hand that kept order. But even a man like Michael knew there were places where logic faltered and fear lingered, places whispered about in hushed tones around campfires and kitchen tables. One such place was the old St. Agnes Church, abandoned for decades and cloaked in shadowed legend. The church stood on the edge of town, its once grand steeple now leaning precariously, stained glass windows shattered, and wooden doors warped by time and neglect. Locals avoided it, speaking of strange noises at night, flickering lights inside, and shadows that moved against the wind. Michael first heard the warnings on a crisp autumn afternoon, when townsfolk gathered at the diner, eyes darting nervously as they spoke in low voices. "Sheriff, you don't want to go near that place," Mrs. Caldwell warned, her hands trembling slightly. "Something's not right there. Folks who've gone near say they hear crying, and worse." Tom Jenkins, the town's grave digger, nodded solemnly. "I've seen flickers in the windows, like lanterns moving when no one should be there." The last preacher who tried to fix the roof left, claiming the church was cursed. Despite their warnings, Michael remained skeptical. He believed in facts, evidence, and the law, not superstition. Yet the reports of recent disturbances, strange lights, unexplained noises, and now missing pets near the church grounds pulled at his curiosity and sense of responsibility. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long, Michael sat in his office, turning over the latest reports. His deputy knocked softly and handed him a weathered notebook filled with town histories and legends about St. Agnes. The words painted a chilling picture, tales of a fire decades ago that claimed lives, of a bitter feud between parishioners, and whispers of dark rituals meant to bind or banish spirits. The church had been shuttered ever since, left to rot and decay. Michael knew the town's fear was rooted deep, not just in past tragedies, but in something the people could feel, but not explain. With a determined sigh, he grabbed his flashlight, holstered his sidearm, and prepared for a visit to the abandoned church. He intended to find answers, to confront whatever was causing the unrest, and reassure his town. Before he left, Mrs. Caldwell appeared at the door, her eyes filled with worry. "Please, Michael, be careful. They say the church doesn't like visitors." He smiled reassuringly, masking his own unease. "I'll be fine. Someone has to face the truth." As he drove toward the church, the road grew narrow, and the trees thickened, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching overhead. The evening mist curled around the abandoned steeple, lending it an otherworldly glow. Parking his cruiser a short distance away, Michael stepped into the cold night air. The church loomed before him, silent, waiting, and watching. He took a deep breath and approached the warped wooden door, raising his fist to knock. The heavy thud echoed through the stillness. No answer. Yet as he stood there, a shiver ran down his spine, not from the cold, but from the unmistakable feeling that something inside was watching him, and it was not pleased. Sheriff Michael Hayes hesitated only a moment after knocking on the heavy, warped door of St. Agnes Church, before pushing it open. The ancient hinges groaned like a mournful sigh, revealing an interior swallowed by darkness and dust. His flashlight's beam cut through the thick shadows, illuminating crumbling pews, shattered stained glass scattered like fallen jewels, and faded murals of saints long forgotten. The air inside was heavy and stale, tinged with the scent of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. As Michael stepped further in, his footsteps echoed, swallowed quickly by the cavernous space. The silence was so complete, it pressed against his ears. He swept his light across the altar, now cracked and overtaken by creeping ivy that had found its way through broken windows. An old hymnal lay open on the floor, its pages yellowed and torn. Suddenly, the soft flutter of fabric brushed against his ear, making him spin around. But the pews were empty. Unease crept over him as the temperature dropped noticeably. His breath misted in the cold air as a faint flicker of movement caught the corner of his eye, something slipping behind a rotting curtain near the confessional. He approached cautiously, heart pounding. Reaching out, he pulled back the heavy drape, revealing nothing but darkness. Then a low whisper echoed from the shadows, indistinct words, like prayer twisted by despair. Michael froze, straining to catch the meaning, but the voice faded as quickly as it came. Shaking off the chill, he pressed onward, following signs of recent disturbance, footprints in the dust, broken twigs near the back entrance, and strange markings crudely etched into the wooden floorboards. The symbols twisted and looped in ways that seemed both ritualistic and desperate. As he moved toward the bell tower stairs, the air grew thicker, the silence broken by distant creaks and the soft drip of water. His flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced menacingly along the peeling walls. Near the base of the tower, a sudden gust blew through the broken windows, extinguishing his lantern and plunging him into darkness. Michael fumbled for his lighter, the small flame trembling as it illuminated a figure standing just beyond the stairwell, a silhouette barely visible but unmistakably human. "Who's there?" he called, voice steady, despite the pounding in his chest. No answer. The figure melted into the darkness. Michael's radio crackled faintly, then fell silent. He tried again. "Dispatch, come in. Do you copy?" Only static responded. A cold dread settled deep within him. The church seemed alive, watching, waiting, and aware of his presence. As he ascended the narrow staircase, the walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with unseen eyes. At the top, the belfry was empty, except for the broken bell swinging slowly in a phantom breeze. Then, from the shadows behind him, a soft whisper drifted. "You shouldn't have come." Michael spun around, flashlight beam piercing the darkness. The room was empty, yet the weight of the words hung in the air. His pulse quickened. The abandoned church was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a place of restless spirits and dark secrets, and he was not alone. With resolve tightening in his chest, Sheriff Hayes pressed on, knowing the night held answers he might not be ready to face. Sheriff Michael Hayes stood frozen for a moment in the cold belfry, the echo of that chilling whisper still reverberating through the air. "You shouldn't have come." The darkness seemed to close in tighter, pressing against him like an unseen force. His flashlight flickered again, casting erratic shadows that twisted and danced on the weathered wooden beams. As he took a cautious step forward, a sudden cold gust swept through the tower, chilling him to the bone. His breath came out in shaky puffs, mingling with the musty air. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, a presence lurking just beyond sight. Michael's mind raced back to the stories he had heard as a boy, tales of the old St. Agnes Church, where tragedy and darkness had long taken root. It was said that the building was cursed, haunted by spirits bound by sorrow and rage, trapped in an endless limbo between worlds. Parishioners vanished, sermons turned to madness, and the church was eventually abandoned, left to crumble. Now, standing amid broken pews and shattered stained glass, those old legends felt frighteningly real. He heard footsteps, soft and measured, behind him. Turning swiftly, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure disappearing down a dark corridor. Heart pounding, Michael followed, flashlight slicing through thick shadows. The figure led him to the old confessional, where the door creaked open slowly, revealing empty darkness within. As he stepped inside, the temperature dropped again, frost forming on the woodwork. Faint whispers filled the cramped space, voices fragmented, desperate pleading. Michael's vision blurred as memories surged unbidden, a young girl's scream, a priest's anguished prayer, an unholy ritual gone wrong. The weight of those tragedies pressed on him like chains. Suddenly, a face appeared at the edge of his flashlight's beam, a translucent woman in tattered clothing, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She reached out, lips trembling as she whispered, "Help us." Michael swallowed hard, steadying himself. "Who are you? What happened here?" The apparition's gaze pierced his soul, bound by sin and silence. "The darkness feeds on fear and secrets. Free us, or join us." As the spirit faded, the church seemed to shudder. Doors slammed, windows rattled, and the walls echoed with mournful cries. Michael felt hands brush his arms, cold and clammy, though no one was there. His mind fought panic, clinging to reason, but the church's oppressive presence threatened to unravel his sanity. Desperately, he searched for answers in old hymnals and scattered journals. Pages spoke of a forbidden ritual, a betrayal that cursed the church and damned its congregation. The haunting grew more intense. Lights flickered wildly. Unseen footsteps followed him through empty halls. At times, the walls whispered secrets too terrible to hear. Michael's resolve wavered, but did not break. He knew the church's torment stemmed from unspoken truths and forgotten sins. To survive, he had to confront both the supernatural and the human darkness that birthed it. As the night deepened, Sheriff Hayes found himself trapped in a nightmare, where past and present collided, forced to face horrors unseen and histories unspoken. The abandoned church was no mere relic. It was a prison, a battleground for lost souls and shattered faith, and Michael was caught in the middle. Sheriff Michael Hayes gritted his teeth as the heavy wooden door of the abandoned church slammed shut behind him. The air grew colder, thicker, almost suffocating. His flashlight flickered, but remained steady as he gripped it tighter, ready to face whatever lurked in the shadows. The weight of history and unseen eyes pressed upon him. The time for silence and caution had passed. He moved deeper into the decaying sanctuary, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. Each step echoed like a heartbeat through the vast empty space. The stained glass windows, fractured and dulled by time, filtered moonlight into ghostly patterns that danced on the walls. A sudden cold gust swept through the nave, extinguishing his flashlight. For a moment, complete darkness swallowed him whole. His breath came out in a steady rhythm as he fumbled to reignite the beam. When light returned, he caught sight of a figure standing at the altar, a silhouette cloaked in shadows, with eyes burning a fiery red. "Why do you trespass?" The voice was low, echoing with centuries of pain and fury. "This place is sacred to the forgotten." Michael squared his shoulders. "I came seeking the truth, to understand what haunts this church, and to end its suffering." The figure's form twisted, revealing faces of the damned, tormented souls bound by betrayal and silence. "The truth is a curse," it whispered. "You may not like what you find." Suddenly, the church around them seemed to shift. Walls rippled like water, pews twisted into grotesque shapes, and the air filled with agonized screams. Michael felt invisible hands clawing at his clothes, pulling him toward a dark pit, where shadows writhed. He resisted, shouting, "I will not be broken. I will see this through." The spectral voices crescendoed into a storm of rage and sorrow. Then from the darkness, a radiant light pierced the chaos, a cross held aloft by Father Samuel Clark, whose steady prayers echoed through the chamber. The darkness recoiled, and the church returned to its dilapidated stillness. The shadowy figure faded, leaving behind a lingering silence heavy with release. Michael collapsed to his knees, breath ragged, but spirit unbroken. The church was no longer just a place of fear. It had become a battleground for redemption. With Father Clark's help, Michael uncovered documents and relics hidden beneath the altar, evidence of a tragic betrayal and a wrongful death that had cursed the congregation. The sheriff realized that to truly free the church, he would need to bring this truth into the light, to face the town's buried sins. But before he could leave, a whisper brushed his ear. Not all who enter leave unchanged. As he exited the church, the night air felt lighter, but the shadows lingered at the edges, silent watchers, waiting for the next soul, brave enough to enter. Sheriff Michael Hayes had confronted the darkness within the church's walls and within himself, and though the battle was won, the war between light and shadow was far from over. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon as Sheriff Michael Hayes emerged from the abandoned St. Agnes Church. The cold morning air felt surprisingly fresh against his skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness he had left behind. Though the oppressive shadows within the church had lessened, the weight of what he had uncovered lingered heavily in his mind. The townspeople gathered cautiously around the courthouse steps, their faces a mix of relief, fear, and curiosity. Rumors had spread quickly about the sheriff's midnight venture, whispers of confrontations with spirits, dark secrets, and a cursed past finally brought to light. Michael addressed the crowd, his voice steady, despite the exhaustion etched into his features. He spoke of the church's tragic history, of betrayal, loss, and silence that had festered for decades, poisoning the town's spirit. He shared the hidden documents and relics discovered beneath the altar, evidence of wrongful death and cover-ups that had chained restless souls to the church. The town listened in somber silence, a collective reckoning unfolding. Many expressed sorrow for the past mistakes, while others clung to hope that acknowledgement would finally heal old wounds. In the days that followed, the church became a place of remembrance rather than fear. Candlelit vigils were held in the square, and the community came together to honor those lost to silence and shadow. The once abandoned building was slowly restored, not just physically, but spiritually, as residents sought forgiveness and closure. Sheriff Hayes, however, found himself changed. The experience had peeled back layers of his own skepticism and hardened resolve, exposing a vulnerability beneath his badge. He had confronted not just ghosts, but the fragility of belief, the weight of legacy, and the thin veil separating the living from the unseen. He often visited the church grounds in quiet contemplation, feeling the lingering presence of those who had found peace and those who still watched from beyond. The sunset would cast long shadows across the restored stone, reminding him that darkness and light coexist in fragile balance. Some nights, Michael heard distant whispers carried on the wind, soft voices thanking him, warning him, or simply lingering as echoes of the past. He knew that while the haunting had subsided, the memory of what transpired would never fully fade. At the sheriff's office, his deputies noticed a subtle change. He was quieter, more reflective, and carried an air of solemn respect for the mysteries that lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. One evening, as he closed the office door, Michael caught sight of his own shadow stretching across the floor, steady and real once more. A small smile touched his lips. He understood now that the badge he wore was more than a symbol of law and order. It was a beacon of courage in the face of the unknown. And though darkness would always watch from the edges, Sheriff Michael Hayes was ready, steadfast, vigilant, and forever changed. By the night, he ignored the warnings and entered the abandoned church. Because some stories don't end with silence, they live on in the shadows, in the light, and in the hearts of those brave enough to listen.